Hi everyone, my name is Jack, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Kelly Clayton had everything going for her. First of all, she was quite smart and bright since high school. She was a role model for other students, active in school, excelled in tests, and passed exams just as well. At the same time, outwardly, she never looked like a girl who spent days and nights sitting over textbooks, cramming lessons, and writing out something from additional literature. No. On the contrary, her looks were considered model-like, and if her grades had left much to be desired, she could have built a modeling career. She could have, but she didn't. After high school, she went to teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, the insane pride of her parents. But only for the first few years of university. It is not known what turning point happened to her then, but one day, Kelly took her documents from the institution and, calling her parents, said that she no longer wanted to study, that she was too young to spend the rest of her life checking notebooks and raising ungrateful children. If she wants to, she will definitely return to her educational endeavors. In the meantime, she wants to travel and live life to her heart's content. Not the best idea, according to her parents, who were so upset that they didn't communicate with their daughter for 6 months. But perhaps if it wasn't for this desperate act, Kelly would never have met Tom Clayton. They met at a party of mutual friends and the young man really liked the girl. Firstly, he, from the first minutes of acquaintance, began to court Kelly and show signs of attention. And secondly, Tom had a beautiful appearance and athletic physique. And all because the guy was a hockey star. For 4 consecutive seasons, he played for the semi-professional team Jackals, and in it, he was considered a strongman, a player who was able to break the opponent's ribs, only if he did not approach the gate. But only a sports career, and especially built on strength and aggression, will someday fail, and Tom had to put the stick in the far corner and enjoy hockey only from the stands or from the couch, watching his favorite team on the TV screen. The couple had to move on with their lives, and first they returned to New York, where they got married, then moved to North Carolina, and then moved to the tiny town of Cato, numbering only a few thousand people. There, Tom franchised a company to rebuild houses after fires or disasters, and worked in a related profession for a friend's company. As for Kelly, after dropping out of university, she worked as a waitress, only changing places, and now she had 2 children. However, Tom was earning well enough, and Kelly could quit her job at any time and take care of her beautiful daughters. But she still believed that extra money would never be superfluous. Besides, she could use it to buy toys for her children and spoil them in every possible way. On September 28, 2015, Tom, as usual, went to play poker with his friends the Millers. He never took his wife to such events. Playing for money implied certain skills and experience in the game. Besides, someone had to stay at home with the children, and a family trip would have turned such gatherings into a noisy buffoonery and would not have brought any pleasure from gambling. That evening, Tom was not lucky in the game, but he did not get up from the table, but on the contrary tried to win back and offered anyone who wanted to stay to play until morning, but no one supported him, and he went home. At home, however, a terrible picture opened before him. His beloved wife was lying in her own pool of blood, badly beaten and, at first glance, was not breathing. Tom panicked and ran through the rooms looking for his children, and luckily they were fine, but very frightened. He grabbed his daughters and headed to his neighbor Derek's house, trying to make sure the children didn't see their mother's mutilated body, and already from the neighbor's house, he dialed the police number. The officer who arrived on the scene found Tom sitting on his knees in front of his wife's body, trying to give her artificial respiration. Only the EMTs were able to pull the man away, who voiced the terrible and unpleasant information. Kelly had been dead for a long time, and neither they nor he could do anything to help her. All 2 floors of the house were drenched in blood. A major mess was in the bedroom. Apparently, there had been a struggle between Kelly and the perpetrator who had committed his atrocity, despite the fact that there were children in the house at the time. Kelly was pushed down the stairs, evidenced by the knocked-down banister, and beaten on the head with a blunt object until they were sure she was dead. There were no hints of knife or gunshot wounds. The policeman who filmed the crime scene noted to himself that Tom was shocked by what had happened and seemed lost in space. He walked from one corner of the room to another, entered the room for a split second, and immediately left it. And he could not tell the policeman where the children's room was or where the emergency exit from the house was. But when asked where Tom himself was at the time of the murder, he answered calmly that he had been at a friend's house all evening, where they were playing poker. Then the policeman, who did not get any clear information from Tom, went to the neighbors to ask some questions of the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, referred to the perpetrator as a robber. According to the words of the eldest daughter, she and her sister were almost asleep, but they heard their mother start screaming loudly from the next room, "Charlie, run! Run away from here!" And then the whole place shook like an earthquake. The girls, after listening to their mother, cautiously went out of their room, but saw the criminal leaning over their mother and beating her with what appeared to them to be a hammer. The girls ran back into the nursery, closed the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. It was a good thing. The criminal wasn't looking for them, because that nightstand, as the policeman pointed out, was so small that it would hardly have apprehended a burglar. Say, what did this burglar look like? Well, he was a big one, like a bear. That big? Wow. What was he wearing? Blue jeans and a black shirt. He was also wearing a mask, like the one Daddy wears when he goes hunting with Mr. Bourne to shoot ducks. So your daddy has a mask like that too. Will you show me? I'd have to ask him where it is. I don't know. What else did you notice when you saw the robber? He had eyes like Dad's, and I don't remember anything else. I saw him literally just a little bit, got scared, and we quickly ran back inside. Police officers checking the house were unable to confirm the girl's account that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at either the front or back door, although on the other hand, the gate to the garage was open and the perpetrator could have entered the house through the garage. Another thing that the police noted is that nothing was stolen from the house. Jewelry was left untouched, lying in a jewelry box, and the safe where Tom kept the cash was not even touched. The doors of the cabinets in the house were also all closed. Usually burglars check every little cabinet, every shelf, but here the whole mess was the aftermath of a fight. Experienced officers, it would seem, understood everything at once. Tom pretends to be a heartbroken husband, and it was he who killed his beloved wife and the mother of his children in order to further receive insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured, and husbands' murderers developing a crime plan always insure the life of their wives, then in case of her death, he could get up to $1 million. All that's needed is to gather evidence and the case will be solved. Especially since even her own daughter said that the mask on the robber was like her father's and eyes like her father. However, the police did not find the hunting mask in the house. After finding out where Tom had spent his time that night, the police questioned the other poker players. "Is Tom the killer? Do you really suspect him?" wondered one of his friends. "That poor guy had his wife murdered, for crying out loud. And instead of looking for the bastard, you want to pin everything on him? How could you think of such a thing?" "No, Tom certainly couldn't have done it. I've known him a long time," replied another, less emotional friend. "He worked 2 jobs around the clock because he loved both Kelly and his kids. There's just no way that could happen. Plus, he was with us all night. We played poker, and even when everyone was tired, he kept insisting on continuing to play." Tom really was suspicious that evening, said his acquaintance Laura. "During a break in the game, he took me into the next room and asked me to give him my phone to call his wife. He supposedly forgot his phone in the car and didn't want to go get it. I was first surprised that the car was 10 meters away from the house. Go to it and get the phone, but still gave him a call. He stepped back to make the call outside. I didn't hear who or what he was talking to, but when I decided to check the outgoing calls, There were no numbers in the call history, so he just deleted the call. Wouldn't you agree that's odd? I told my husband about it, and he was as surprised as I was. My husband was sitting at the playing table next to Tom and noticed that Tom was not watching the process of dealing cards or watching the people around him, which is very important in poker, but was sitting with his head bowed over the surface of the table where the cards were hiding the screen of his phone. He had his phone on him. Why had he tricked me then? Where was he calling? Who couldn't he call from his phone? After Laura's testimony, the police once again questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and the girl repeated what she had told the policeman the first time. The robber looked a lot like her father. The next testimony was given by the niece of the murdered, already after Tom was behind bars. I didn't tell Aunt Kelly. I just didn't want to upset her. She was very fond of Tom. She literally loved him. And besides, she has 2 children by him. They are my sisters. Who needs my truth? Tom was not the man he appeared to be at first glance. Yes, he occasionally spoiled my aunt with attention and flowers. He could easily babysit, which other fathers rarely do. But that was all at home. And at work, he was a completely different person. Aunt Kelly decided to help me one day and arranged for Tom to take me to work for him. She was too young to be on her own, so she understood me as well as anyone and wanted the best for me. I worked for Tom all last summer, doing correspondence registration and document management. I didn't know him well before that, so at first we had a strictly working relationship. Then he got drunk somewhere and came to the office in that state. There was no one there but me and him, and for some reason he started to tell me that his family was fictitious. He loves his daughters very much, but he doesn't care about his wife, and he hasn't had any feelings for her for a long time. He's even had a few affairs on the side during their marriage and even considered leaving Aunt Kelly, but he didn't, simply because he was afraid that a divorce might leave him without a house and without money. Looking ahead, it is important to note that some of the interviewed female participants of that evening's poker game confirmed the words of Kelly's niece, that Tom was not such a faithful husband and had a sexual relationship with 2 women who were also playing poker that night. In addition to the information about Tom's promiscuous life, Kelly's 16-year-old niece also told about another employee of Tom's firm, Michael Beard. Michael was doing repair work on houses after the fire, and he was doing a good job. But there was one moment in those houses where Bird worked, constantly missing things, and if the first few times Tom did not believe his customers, referring to the fact that during the fire, the owners could lose something. Then when the accusations of theft began to be repeated for the 3rd and 4th time, there was no doubt. Michael Bird not only restores the floor and walls, but also steals. Plus, in addition to stealing, there were complaints that Michael was allowing himself to come to work drunk. I was in the office when Michael's stealing came to light. Tom could yell at his employee and kick him out on the street. He was upset with his subordinate's behavior like that. He kept asking him, "How could you?" Or, "Haven't you thought about your family? Where are you going to work now?" After the incident, Tom fired Bird, but still called companies he knew and offered them to hire his former employee. Tom recommended Michael, and when all his options were exhausted, Tom took Bird in to help with the household, cutting the grass, watering the plants, doing minor repairs around the house. The detective called Michael Beard in for questioning. He said he only stole because he and his family needed the money. Tom was very good to me, defended me to the end, but I know it was my own fault. He has a very good wife. She fed me when I worked for them, even though she really shouldn't have. She also gave my children clothes that her daughters had grown out of. I am very grateful for all they have done for me. I feel so bad for Kelly. When I heard about her death, I couldn't believe my ears. I felt so bad. I even went to church and prayed for her to go to the best of all worlds. The police did not find anything strange in Michael's story and let him go, but the interrogation of his wife, Mrs. Bird, made the police doubt his words. According to his wife Holly, Tom offered Michael some work, which he did not say, and for this work he promised to pay him $10,000. Now that was interesting. Michael was called back to the station and had a lie detector hooked up to him. All questions were failed. Bird was lying and therefore failed the test. Realizing he couldn't get away with it, he began to testify. Indeed, Tom promised Bird $10,000 if Michael, on the day when Tom will play poker, sneak into his house, kill his wife, and set a fire in his house. The plan was to strangle Kelly and then make it look like she just burned to death in an accidental fire. Plus, the family home was insured for a very large sum of money. As the police checked, it was true. Kelly's home and life were insured at the highest rate. 2 cans of gasoline were waiting for Michael in the garage through which the house was to be entered. Everything was fine here. Bird entered the house when everyone was already asleep. He quietly began to climb the stairs and reach the bedroom where Kelly was supposed to be sleeping. But the young woman was either awake or awakened by the sound of the open door, and when she saw a strange man in the doorway, she began to scream in fright. Michael was just as frightened and pounced on Kelly, trying to close his huge hands around her neck. But it wasn't that easy. Kelly began to fight back. I had no idea that a seemingly fragile Kelly had so much strength in her, says Michael. A heck of a fight ensued, which spilled over from the second-floor bedroom to the first-floor kitchen. Michael, because of the shock and panic, could not concentrate on the fight, but only waved his arms in all directions or just grabbed Kelly's clothes while Kelly, defending her life, aimed very accurately at Michael's face. And if the police had come to Bird earlier, they would have seen the marks from the beatings on him. But everything turned out as it did. After a long struggle, Michael hit Kelly's head against the wall with all his might. She fell, and for a while couldn't find the strength to get up. Michael took out a hammer and began hitting the young woman's head with it until she stopped showing signs of life. Michael, maddened by what had happened, just ran out of the house, even forgetting that Tom asked him not only to kill Kelly, but also to set the house on fire to cover up the crime. Michael had an accomplice, Mark Blanford, who in fact served only as a driver. The day before it happened, I got a call from Michael. I had worked with him on a construction site for a long time, and I had stayed with him for a couple weeks last year, so I knew him well. I knew Michael was into petty theft, so when he called me and asked me to drive while he broke into someone's house, I wasn't surprised. I wanted to turn him down, but he offered me $500. I thought long and hard at first, but he talked me into it. He said he just wanted to rob a businessman, and he needed help to get out of there before the cops got there. He said he'd help with the car. I gave in to his entreaties, but on the condition that I park somewhere far away from the house. He agreed. That evening, I waited for him in that car in a dark alley, and he came back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling me to move as fast as possible. He didn't have any bag or sack on him, which didn't look much like a robbery. I didn't ask him any questions along the way, simply because I didn't want to know anything. I just wanted my $500, which, by the way, I didn't end up getting. On the way out, he asked me to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of here. I stopped there. He hastily stripped off his outer garments and threw them off the bridge. If you need to be shown the place, I'll show you. Indeed, police officers who arrived on the scene at Mark's behest found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. There was no question of murder. When he went into the house, however, Kelly was already dead. And who killed her? The detective asked. I think it was Tom. He offered me money for murder and arson from the beginning, but I refused the first offer. I'm not willing to kill a man for any money. He said I had nothing to fear, but he never could talk me into it. You may not believe me, but I almost lost my mind when I saw Kelly's body. I knew right then and there that he was setting me up. so I ran out of the house. He's the killer," Michael insisted. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Bird had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination, and the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. In turn, Tom also did not admit that it was he who ordered the massacre of his wife from a former problem employee of his company. According to him, Michael knew that he had money, knew that he was not poor, and because Bird lost his job, as well as because of resentment associated with the dismissal, he decided to rob his house. But Kelly was at home that night, for which he paid with his life. It might have been difficult to prove Tom's guilt and his conspiracy with Michael if Laura, the woman who had been playing poker that night, had not told the police that Tom had called from her cell phone. The detective requested a transcript of her calls, and expectations were confirmed. Then, on the night of September 28, 29, Tom Clayton called Michael Beard. Michael was the first to go to trial. He continued to insist that he had been hired to set fire to the house in order to collect the insurance payout. He didn't kill Kelly, and as for the blood on his clothes, it was just because he was touching a dead and mutilated body. That's why he got dirty. He'd thrown his stuff away so no one would think he'd been at Clayton's house that night. His speech sounded convincing. The jury had been deliberating for 7 hours. In the end, they concluded that Michael Beard was guilty on all counts. He was facing life in prison. As for Tom, his lawyers were able to obtain records of conversations and correspondence between him and Michael, and none of the conversations clearly discussed their devious plan. The prosecution's requests for billing transcripts of his movements yielded no concrete results either. All the evidence was circumstantial. If it weren't for one nuance, the car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company, and Tom, coming to the office on his personal Toyota, left it in the parking lot, where for some reason moved to the company pickup truck, which later drove to Michael's house and left there, and took back the day after the tragedy. That is, in fact, he gave Michael the car on which he and Mark went to the crime. It was this fact that was testified to at the trial by the jury. The trial lasted 6 days, and the jury concluded that Tom had hired Michael to commit this horrible crime after all. Michael, in turn, filed an appeal. In his defense, he used the words of little Charlie, who said that the eyes in the slit of the mask belonged to her father. However, the court rejected the appeal because the description of the clothes matched the one found under the bridge. As a result, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard received life sentences. As for Mark, he was charged with manslaughter, for which he received 4 years in prison. Tom and Kelly's children were given custody to Kelly's sister, Kim. After some time, Charlie has moved on from the tragedy. She occasionally remembers her mom, but absolutely won't talk about her father, who she will never see again.
From an unforgettable adventure, like a long-awaited vacation on the Azure coast under the shade of palm trees, life could be wonderful. However, imagine going on your wedding trip only to be accused of committing a real crime. Would the honeymoon be as bright and carefree in such a case? Unforgettable, of course, but in a different way. Isabella Rodriguez, later known as Hellman, was born in 1975 in Colombia, a country where everyone speaks Spanish. Yet Isabella dreamt of the American dream. She bought books in English, listened to songs on the radio, all to learn the language and leave for North America. Although she managed to learn the language, her southern accent stayed with her forever. Nevertheless, this did not stop her from moving to Florida, getting a job as a real estate agent and helping people who spoke only Spanish with renting or buying homes. In 2002, Isabella, though not exactly lucky, married William Hellman. Despite living in marriage for 10 years, their union was filled with continuous quarrels and domestic disputes. Finally, when their patience burst, they filed for divorce. The divorce process lasted a very long time, 2 years. During these 2 years, Isabella found a new man, Louis Bennett, with whom she hoped to find happiness. Louis was originally from Great Britain, but moved to Australia as a child, gaining dual citizenship. He graduated from the prestigious Camborne School of Mines, but never worked in his specialty. Instead, he returned to Australia and opened his own successful solar panel manufacturing company, eventually entering the American market. With his main office in Florida, Louis started looking for a wife online. For a long time, Louis had no luck in love online. He flipped through profiles, uninterested in those who reached out first. However, when he saw Isabella's photo, she reminded him of Jennifer Lopez, and he decided to write to her. They corresponded frequently. Isabella shared her dreams of moving to America, her efforts to learn the language, her job searches, and even her past relationships. Bennett was not put off by her ongoing divorce, as it was only a matter of time. Tired of past relationships and a draining divorce, Isabella took the initiative to meet in person. She traveled to be with Louis wherever he was, England, Australia, or even Thailand. Louis, wanting to impress his new love, bought a catamaran to fulfill his childhood dream of traveling the Caribbean Sea. His favorite book was Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, which perhaps foreshadowed a significant role in his life. Isabella spent all her free time, whether it was a vacation or a long weekend, traveling with Louis. She noticed that during these trips, Bennett barely worked. He joked or seriously claimed he had a huge inheritance, so there was nothing to worry about. Isabella accepted his explanation. In July 2016, the couple celebrated the birth of their first child, Amelia. However, this joyous event also marked the beginning of their first serious disagreements. Due to her past experiences, Isabella found these conflicts particularly difficult. They could not agree on how to raise their daughter or in which country she would be better off growing up. Louis insisted with all his might that Amelia grew up in Australia next to his parents, while Isabella, on the contrary, did not want to leave America. Finally, the young father gave in, and in 2017, the whole family moved to Florida. There, despite already having a daughter, they decided to finally get married. Isabella begged her now husband to go on a honeymoon, as she hoped that this sea voyage would bring them back to the state when they first got to know each other, carefree sailing around the islands on the high seas on his catamaran. Louis heard his wife's whims and promised her that there would definitely be a honeymoon, but a little later. Louis wasn't lying. In late April 2017, he returned from Australia, and the couple headed out on their romantic cruise. At first, judging by the posts on social media, everything was indeed as Isabella wanted. In all the photos, they are smiling, clasping each other in their arms, and traveling around the Caribbean islands. However, then after those endless honeymoon photos, a lull began. A long one for 2 weeks. When Isabella reappeared online, she told her family that she and her husband were in Cuba and were planning to return to Florida, but didn't know which way yet. She also added that they had a very bad connection there, so in the next few days, they might not expect a call from her. On the night of May 15th, the Coast Guard received a call for help from Louis. He said he was alone on a raft in the open sea. Rescuers immediately went in search of him. The man was found near the Bahamas, indeed alone on a boat that was filled to the top with various things and provisions. On the shore, Louis told the following story. On May 14th, after a tiring day, he asked Isabella to give him a few hours of rest, and entrusting his wife with the management of the catamaran, went to take a nap in the cabin. Louis was awakened by a heavy thump from below, and he called out to his wife, but she did not respond. Then he went upstairs, looked around, and realized that Isabella was nowhere on board, and the very blow that had awakened him had created a hole in the bottom of the catamaran through which water began to enter his vessel, and the boat began to sink. Louis decided that his wife was simply carried overboard by the blow, and since she was wearing a vest, she was fine. In order not to go down with his child, he gathered all his belongings and moved to the rescue boat. Meanwhile, the rescuers, having taken a look at the contents of Louis's life raft, were surprised as the man took only those things that belonged to him, as if he had no hope that his beloved Isabella was alive and would soon be found. He even brought his tea set with him. Also, in his backpack were found aluminum tubes inside which were hidden silver coins, but this discovery was not paid attention to because it was necessary to move urgently to search for Isabella. The Coast Guard used absolutely all the equipment they had, including helicopters, and surveyed the entire area, but all to no avail. They found the very catamaran which, according to Lewis's statements, crashed on underwater rocks. But there were no underwater rocks or reefs in the vicinity, nor had the boat itself gone completely to the bottom. It was decided to inspect the boat. For this purpose, several divers were sent to it. Again, the results of their examination did not coincide with Lewis's story. As I said earlier, there were no underwater rocks at the wreck site. The boat simply could not have collided with anything, and the holes that were on the bottom were made from inside the boat, not outside. Another literally shocking oddity in this case was that the boat had all the escape hatches open, which of course increased the rate of sinking of the catamaran. Lewis mentioned in his story that he left the boat over the side, as he was supposed to. The fact is that escape hatches are strictly forbidden to be opened, and they are needed only when there is no other way to leave the sinking vessel. Also, Lewis, being an experienced seafarer, did not use a beacon or satellite phone, which would have helped rescuers find travelers in time in case of disaster. That is, from the outside, it looked as if Lewis deliberately sank the ship and made it look like an accident. But then where is his wife? On May 17th, the search for Isabella continued, although 120 hours had passed since the catamaran wreck, while the possibility of finding a woman alive in the middle of the open sea is only 13 hours. On May 18th, the search stopped. Isabella has not been found to this Isabella, and what's more, he bought just one ticket to Australia for May 19th. He didn't even hope that the rescue team would be able to find his wife, dead or alive, but he tried his best to get his wife's death certificate as soon as possible so that he could get the insurance he was entitled to as a close relative. This was denied after the insurance company refused. Lewis visited Isabella's parents and tried to take his daughter away from them. They blamed him for Isabella's death and did not want to give Amelia away. He was able to take his daughter only after calling the police. On May 28th, he left Amelia with his parents in the UK and returned to Florida to try again to get the insurance payment, which by law was entitled to him. To the police, Lewis's behavior seemed extremely suspicious. They were literally sure that he was to blame for his wife's disappearance, but they had no evidence. Even the catamaran on which the murder could theoretically have taken place, and on which it was possible to find evidence confirming it, had gone to the bottom to a great depth, and it was impossible to get it out of there. But the search of the house where Lewis and Isabella lived, as well as Lewis's own cell phone, proved fruitful. Yes, the fact that the husband and wife could not communicate with each other for weeks, and the husband himself could periodically disappear from home and not appear there for a long time, is not considered any evidence. But the fact that in the house were found recording devices on which Isabella recorded constant threats from her husband already pushed the investigation to the idea that not everything in their relationship was smooth. Judging by these records, Lewis repeatedly promised to kill his wife. Isabella even told her friends about it and shared with them that she wanted to leave her fierce husband and cruel tyrant, but only tried one more time, now the last, to save their relationship. But as we already know, she never succeeded. The main reason for quarrels were debts. Lewis, real estate, electricity, credit cards. He literally drowned in debt, and getting out of this pit seemed impossible. Moreover, he did not try to solve his problems, but only continued to travel on his catamaran. Still did not work anywhere, and in addition spent some of the rest of his savings on such things as Thai boxing lessons in Thailand. Of course, Isabella didn't like it, and in the meantime, Lewis even forced his wife to give up child rearing and get a job so that she could pay off his debts while he was doing more important things. Looking into Louis Bennett's debts, the investigation also found that between 2014 and 2016, the man engaged in international transfers totaling about $160,000. As it turned out, the very coins that rescuers found in Louis's backpack were very rare and collectible. Later, the investigation will establish that the coins were stolen in 2016. One of Louis's acquaintances, who at that time was a member of the crew of the ship Kitty, and when the crew went to town, this acquaintance stole the coins and gave them to Louis for further resale. Yes, it was for smuggling that the investigation managed to put Louis behind bars because, during a search of the house, in addition to those tape recordings, the police found some of the coins. For smuggling, Louis received 7 months in prison. There, while behind bars, the man also received a second charge just for the involuntary manslaughter of his wife. The investigation carefully checked all the facts that they had on their hands, and which they so scrupulously collected piece by piece, and came to the conclusion that during their trip, Isabella found in her husband's things those very collectible coins, and between them there was a scandal. But it was not entirely clear whether Isabella had been killed on the boat or in the water. During the quarrel, quite fiery and somewhere even cruel, husband could either not calculate the force of the blow or throw the woman into the water and then do not provide her with any help. And so Isabella drowned while her husband watched her torment being on board. During the tragedy, Louis realized that his wife's death was a good thing for him, and if he made it look like a sinking boat accident, he would get an additional payout for the sinking catamaran, in addition to the money for Isabella's death, since it was also considered an insured event. But only the whole story on the part of the prosecution was just a fantasy of the grief-stricken relatives. Louis was never charged with premeditated murder for lack of evidence. He was offered a deal that if he pleaded guilty, he would only get 8 years. Louis accepted, but should he have agreed to it if he really is not guilty? And all the evidence against him is only a tape recorder where he threatens his wife. Louis accepted, but should he have agreed to it if he really is not guilty? And all the evidence against him is only a tape recorder where he threatens his wife that otherwise Louis Bennett would serve the rest of his time for the smuggling article and be released very soon in November 2018. Louis Bennett received 8 years in prison, and all of the insurance payments and all of his wife's assets which he had claimed and for which he had arranged, all of this will go to Amelia. Also, the court ordered Louis to pay monetary compensation for his daughter, who had not yet experienced serious psychological trauma while growing up.
Hi everyone, my name is Jack, and today we're going to look at another horrible case. January 1999. David and Belinda Temple were expecting their second child. Belinda was due to give birth as soon as possible. The doctors predicted labor in a couple of weeks. Like all pregnant women, Belinda was tired very much and quickly, and she still had her son Evan, who also required attention and care. That day, David decided to relieve his wife from household chores and gave her some time for an evening rest. And so that she would not be distracted by anything, he and his son went for a walk in the park. Father and son were having fun. Walking in the fresh air quickly tires and whets the appetite, so after the walk, they went to a cafe to eat a sandwich and drink a Coke. After the cafe, they drove home. David parked the car and noticed that the front door of his house had broken glass. "Evan, I'm going to take you to visit Harlan for a bit, okay?" said David, and without waiting for an answer from his son, quickly led him across the street to a neighboring house where family friends lived. "Why can't we go to Mom's?" asked the son, who could barely keep up with his father. "Mom's in the hospital right now." David couldn't think of anything else to say. Quentin Harlan had barely opened the door to the unexpected guests, and not even had time to say hello, before David took his son into the living room without speaking and ran toward his house. Quentin, not understanding anything, shouted to his wife to look after the child, and himself ran after his silent friend. "What's the matter?" Quentin shouted, but when he saw the broken front door of Temple's dwelling, he realized that David probably didn't know what was waiting for him inside. The house was a mess. All the closets were open, things were scattered on the floor, and worst of all, there were trails of blood on the floor that led to the stairs. Quentin pushed David aside and saw that under the stairs, in the dressing room, Belinda was lying belly down with her arms spread apart and a huge hole in the back of her head. David, apparently out of shock, did not even cry out, did not utter a word, did not rush to his wife's body, but immediately took out his cell phone and dialed the police number. The operator on the other end of the line didn't anticipate the brutality of the murder, so he asked David to check Belinda's pulse and even give her CPR. "What the hell kind of CPR are you talking about? Her head is splattered all over the walls." Police officers immediately rushed to the scene, except they didn't get inside the house for a long time. The Temple family's bull terrier, named Shaq, growled and barked at the unfamiliar uniformed men and seemed about ready to lunge at the police officers. One of the officers even drew his service pistol as David, who had come out of the house, yelled for them to put their guns away and hurriedly took the aggressive dog into the garage. Once inside the house where the tragedy had recently occurred, the police looked around and concluded that the burglars were at work here, who did not know that the mistress was in the house at that moment, and even though she was pregnant, they had no choice but to shoot her and thus get rid of the witness. 1986. Belinda gets a college education in her hometown. Even though her twin sister Brenda left to study at Steve Austin University, Belinda stayed with her parents because in high school, she started dating Marshall Kelmy, who was 3 years older than her and whom she was just crazy about. Her father and mother were against this relationship, at least because of her boyfriend, their daughter would not be able to get a prestigious education and, as it usually happens, would get pregnant early and end up dropping out of even a community college. On this topic, there were many scandals in their home. Carol's mother did not allow her daughter to start a joint life with Marshall and dropped then such a phrase, "He is nobody to you. When you get married, you can move out anywhere, but until then, you have your own house." Belinda was a stubborn girl who always got her way, and she must have taken her mother's words as a wake-up call. Sometime later, at a family dinner, to which Marshall had been invited, despite the inhibitions, the young couple announced that they were to be married. There was a heavy silence at the table. "Well, now that they've decided," Mom gritted her teeth, and they spent the rest of the evening in complete silence. Belinda had actually made the decision herself, wanting to show her parents that she was an adult and capable of making her own decisions. Her boyfriend was not particularly eager for an official marriage, but did not refuse the proposal of his girlfriend, whether he did not want to offend or for some other reason. The two young people got married. No, there was no grand celebration. Belinda wore her sister's white dress, called a few friends, and she and Marshall signed, and then just walked around the city, drinking champagne and having fun. The very next day, Belinda packed her things and moved in with her husband, who at that time still lived with his parents and rent a separate place was not even planned. Official marriage, in fact, did not affect their relationship, and as already mentioned, Belinda did it all just to stop hearing motherly reproaches and become independent. But the taste of this life turned out to be very bitter. Not 6 months later, Marshall began to spend little time at home, saying he was working late, but was actually with another woman. Belinda found out when she noticed that her husband was acting strangely. One day she waited until his workday was over and followed her husband, and that's when it all came to light. Marshall was walking hand in hand with some strange woman, most likely with his colleague. The deceived wife did not organize any fights and jealousy scenes, but simply packed her things and returned to her mother. The guilty Marshall hung around the doorstep of her house for a long time, often calling on the phone, trying to beg her forgiveness, but Belinda was unshakable and too proud to forgive the young man. They were soon divorced. 1998. Belinda is already pregnant with her second child, but still works part-time at the school. The children listen to her half-heartedly, respect her for her fairness, and even a little afraid. Belinda herself is worried that because of her pregnancy, she will miss the basketball competition between schools, and she will not be able to prepare the team well, because her colleague, Richard Bachman, does not care about her team and children in general. He has confessed to her so many times that if he had another job, he would have given up being a teacher long ago. Belinda disliked this attitude and could not understand how this flabby and fat 40-year-old man was still in his position. Belinda was not one of those teachers who turned a blind eye to student absenteeism. So when she noticed that one of her students, high school senior Riley Joe Sanders, had been absent from class for months, she immediately reached out to her colleagues. She wanted to know if this was her problem as a teacher or if the boy was a systematic truant. Her colleagues answered that it was not her problem. The boy was brought up in a bad family, no one cared about him, and he appeared at school only rarely. Belinda couldn't leave it at that. That same evening, she visited his mother, who lived nearby, and had a serious talk with her, which later bore fruit. However, it wasn't quite what the young teacher had expected. Riley Joe Sanders came to class, practiced on an equal footing with the other students, but during a basketball game, when Sanders pushed his opponent and Belinda pointed out Riley's disgusting behavior, he insulted her with the last words and even said something like, "You'll answer to me for this. You better look around, especially in the evenings." 1987. After breaking up with Marshall, Belinda had nothing left to hold on to in her hometown. So she followed her sister to Stephen F. Austin State University. She loved her time at the university. It seems that she truly found her calling. In addition to studying, she works part-time as a basketball coach, and the young woman had high expectations. At the same university, she meets David Temple. He, like Belinda, is a part-time coach, but for soccer, and also plays for the university team as team captain. Soccer for David was an integral part of life. He practiced it since childhood, and even then it was clear that he would become a star. At school, he always successfully played for his team, for which he was respected by all teachers, even though David had a difficult character. He could easily insult anyone or even beat up, but he got away with it all. Being on the field during the game, he would start with half a turn, and then could not calm down for a very long time. Later, however, one of the players on his team said that David's aggressiveness is due to the fact that he takes steroids. With Belinda, David behaved completely differently, turned into a caring guy who literally could carry his queen in his arms. With one amendment, as soon as someone smiled in the direction of his beloved, as David immediately turned on and tried to clarify the relationship on the fists. Belinda also came to the taste, and David's parents, they literally idolized her. They really liked that she, as well as their son, crazy about sports, which means they have a lot in common. But her twin sister, and in principle Belinda's friends, from this union were, to put it mildly, not thrilled. The whole point is that before meeting David, they knew Belinda as a strong-willed and independent personality, and in this relationship, she changed a lot, became constrained, quiet, humble. It seemed that her whole life was built around pleasing David. In addition to all of this, being in this toxic relationship, Belinda became distant from her family. Calls to her parents became less and less frequent, and trips home, whether for vacations or weekends, stopped altogether. Who in the family could like this? Closer to graduation, the couple got themselves a bull terrier and named their pet, Shaq. And after receiving their long-awaited diplomas, David and Belinda got married. 1999. The police began to examine the crime scene. How could the burglar get into a house guarded by such a vicious dog? In fact, how could the perpetrator distract the bull terrier that prevented the police from making a step into the Temple yard? Then they turned their attention to the front door. The glass was broken, as if the perpetrator had tried to open the lock from the inside. But in that case, the shards of glass would have been near the threshold. But here they were in the distance, to the right of the entrance. So the glass was broken when the door was unlocked. Why would they do that? In the living room, there was a box on a nightstand, with a toppled TV lying on the floor beside it. The policeman opened it. Inside lay earrings, rings, a chain, in appearance resembling gold. Also not clear why the robber did not touch the jewelry. With each new minute spent inside the Temple family home, the police officers came more and more to the conclusion that everything that had happened inside resembled a dramatization. They knew from experience that in a robbery, the criminal takes absolutely everything he can find and carry away. And here, as it seems, nothing was even taken. And then there was that dog that wouldn't leave their minds. Something was clearly wrong here. As for the murder, the shot was fired in the back of the head, presumably with a 12-gauge shotgun, while the victim was kneeling with his back to the killer. That said, a shotgun is not considered a popular weapon among robbers. It's very difficult to carry or transport and still not be seen. In Belinda's case, the murder was absolutely 4 o'clock in the afternoon. A criminal wouldn't be walking around with a shotgun in broad daylight. David, do you keep any weapons at home? Yeah, I have a couple of rifles. David showed his weapons to the police officers, but the shotgun that could have killed Belinda was not among them. The cops asked David to ride with them to the station to give a statement and take an inventory of the stolen items. The man was very nervous, but nevertheless went with the police officers. His son Evan, who did not yet know what had happened, stayed at Harlan's house. 1996. David Temple and Quentin Harlan, in addition to being neighbors, worked at the same school. You could say that they were real friends. They often met outside of work hours to watch games on TV together or have a family barbecue. One day, David and Quentin were brought together by something else besides their love of sports. There was a new young teacher at the school, Heather Scott. Quentin immediately paid attention to her, gave all sorts of signs of attention, and one day even invited her to an evening dinner, but Heather refused him. It so happened that Quentin had a rival, and this rival, surprisingly, turned out to be David. Quentin was beyond angry and resentful that his married friend, who even has a son, was building a secret relationship at work. You have to hand it to Quentin. He was a good friend and could keep a secret. Heather did not even suspect about David's marital status, since he did not wear a wedding ring and did not tell anything about his real life. Moreover, outside the walls of the school, David and Heather behaved like a happy couple, and it was noticed by the whole teaching staff of the school. Belinda knew nothing about David's second life. Once she talked to Quentin and revealed to him that she suspected her husband of cheating, but Quentin, of course, dissuaded the suffering wife. You have a vivid imagination. David is your husband and a great family man. How could you think such a thing? And there was much to think about. If David had previously been extremely reverent towards Belinda, now he could afford to insult his wife even in front of other people, such as, for example, he often called her fat, although after childbirth she only a little weight gain, asked to go to another room when there were guests in the house, as if she scares them with her untidy appearance, and so on. Belinda, instead of having a serious talk with her husband on the subject, accepted this attitude toward herself, but cried at night and felt deeply unhappy as a woman. In parallel, all the while, David was enjoying his new relationship with Heather. 1999. The police suspected David, but they couldn't prove anything. But flipping through the case files of burglaries in the neighborhood, they learned that 8 days before the murder at the Temple house, a house on the next street had been burglarized, and the perpetrator was Riley Joe Sanders. Yes, the same persistent truant from the school where Belinda taught and who had threatened her. He was immediately called in for questioning. Riley had no alibi on the day of the murder, and besides, his father had a shotgun, just a 12-gauge. But when they searched the Sanders house, no weapon was found. When the high school student realized that the police had every reason to detain him, he confessed that on the day of the murder of the teacher, he was with friends, and hid it only because he was with a large group of people smoking pot and did not want to frame others with his testimony. The charge against Riley was dropped. 1998. Because of a new relationship with a coworker, David became further and further estranged from his family. His psychological pressure on his wife grew steadily. He never once raised his hand at her, but all their communication consisted only of insults. It was during this year that Belinda learned that she was pregnant again. This news made her forget about all the past offenses against David, and she felt over the moon. David seemed to be trying to act like a happy father too, but it wasn't working. Sometimes David did not even come home at night, and Belinda was afraid to ask what was the reason for his absence at night, because her husband could get very angry and make a real scandal. A pregnant woman did not want that. Belinda often asked David to help her prepare for the birth of the baby, to go to the store for things, to make repairs in the new children's room, to install shelves on the walls. David ignored all of his wife's requests, And Belinda, although she was in a position, began to do everything on her own. To go shopping, paint the walls, assemble the purchased furniture. David made no effort at all. Christmas was coming. Belinda was already 8 months pregnant. She decided to discuss with her husband what they would give each other, but David suggested that they should not give gifts together this year, and that the money saved would be better spent on the baby that was about to be born, especially since the doctors had warned the expectant mother that she might go into premature labor and the baby might be born before the new year. Christmas came. Although the spouses had agreed not to give each other anything, David never gave Belinda anything, not even a nice little thing. Moreover, he suddenly packed his things and said that all the New Year's holidays will spend with friends on the hunt. Belinda told her sister about it, and she dropped all her plans to come to her so that Belinda would not feel abandoned. And as the doctors warned, labor could begin at any moment. David, of course, wasn't on any hunting trips with his friends. He spent the holidays with Heather, whose neck was decorated with a gold necklace, a gift from Temple for Christmas. 2007. It seemed that David Temple has almost forgotten about the murder of his wife, as if in his life no Belinda Temple had never been. He did not care about the fact that from the moment of the murder has passed 5 years and the culprit has not been found. He married Heather in 2001, and the two of them raised Evan, but back in 2004. In November, there was a knock on his door. On the doorstep stood police officers who, handcuffing David, informed him that he was being held on suspicion of the murder of Belinda Temple. David, as before, denied everything. David's trial did not begin until 2007. According to the investigation, the motive for the crime was his new love affair with Heather. Interviewed colleagues of David said that more than once during Belinda's pregnancy, heard him bragging about how he easily exchanged his fat and pregnant wife for a young and beautiful Heather. According to the prosecution's version, David killed Belinda immediately after she came home from work because the young woman was found in her work uniform and work shoes. He then initiated the robbery by throwing things around the house and quickly drove to the park with his son, which provided an alibi. The prosecution also added such facts that nothing was stolen from the house, and there was a vicious dog in the yard that would not let any stranger into the house. The murder weapon was probably dropped by David in the rice paddy, as there were witnesses who saw David's car stopped near the paddy and only Evan was in the car at the time. However, the shotgun was never recovered in that area. Heather's testimony was that before the murder of Belinda, their relationship with David was not considered serious, and she did not even love him. These words Temple certainly did not like and introduced confusion into the jury's decision. Could David kill his wife for the sake of a non-serious relationship? Or Heather is lying, trying to save her husband in this way? In November 2007, David was sentenced to life in prison. 2009. A friend of Riley Sanders goes to the police to clear his conscience. From his words then, a few years ago, Riley told him how he took his father's shotgun with the intention of robbing the Temple family home, and thereby teaching his teacher a lesson about his mother's truancy at school. And he really almost managed to enter the house, but at that moment, a bull terrier ran out of the garage, and Riley shot at the dog, but did not hit, and afraid that the sound of shotgun fire would attract the neighbors, quickly ran away from there. This testimony was submitted to the court. A review of the case began. In the meantime, David was released from prison on bail. Heather had no intention of being the wife of a man who had spent so much time in jail and was not sure how much longer he would spend in jail. She filed for divorce. It took the jury a long time to decide what kind of punishment David deserved. It was when Temple was free, and the court had not yet decided his sentence that the pandemic began. It wasn't until 2023 that the case was revisited. David was found guilty after all. He was sentenced to life in prison with parole after 17 years. His son Evan, while the trial was going on until the last moment, did not believe that his father was capable of such a cold-blooded murder, and throughout the trial, supported him to the last moment. Thanks for watching, guys. That was Jack with you. Subscribe to the channel. There are many shocking stories ahead.